for me, he was able to go to the National Geographic Society, and on the basis of this, they provided money for me to continue my research. So it was a real breakthrough observation in many different ways. And over the years, we learned more about this tool-using behavior, not just twigs to fish for termites, but many objects used in many different ways, mostly for feeding, also cleaning themselves, blood or mud or something, with bunches of leaves and things like that. And we now know today that all over Africa, there are different tool-using behaviors, and it's very clear that the young ones learn these by watching and imitating. This isn't some kind of instinctive behavior that just appears, although I think it is instinctive to reach out and use an object in some kind of situation. But the actual different, we can call them primitive cultures, and passed from one generation to the next through observational learning. Now, this is as we've talked about, a technological university. This is the beginning of technology. This predates the stone tools that the anthropologists, paleontologists have uncovered. This is the beginning of technology in the animal kingdom. For me, perhaps the most fascinating thing has been to observe how the close bonds develop between mothers and their offspring. The female has her first child when she's about 13. She then has one child approximately every 5 years. They have not fallen into the trap of overpopulating their environment as we have. And what happens when the first child is 5 or 6, when the next baby is born, that first child is still completely emotionally dependent on the mother, still travels around, still is learning an awful lot about how to behave in different situations, where certain foods are, and so forth. And so you see the bonds, the affectionate bonds, developing not just between mothers and offspring over time, but also between the siblings. And these bonds can last throughout a life which at Gombe is seldom more than 50 years, although in captivity chimpanzees can live to be 70. The oldest one that I've ever heard of is 74 years old. She lives in a zoo in America. I know her very well. She's called Little Mama. And I was saying to the children this afternoon, she would go down really well in your society because she cannot bear to move around without a piece of cloth over her head. I think I'm going to send you a photograph because it's quite funny. Anyway, occasionally twins are born. We've had 4 sets of twins in 52 years that we know about, but only 1 pair of twins have survived. We've had a single young one survive, but twins as twins, just these 2. Now these 2, this is when they're very small infants, they are now 13 years old, and this year each one had her first baby. So, you know, this is like a soap opera, really studying, each one has his own or her own life history. I said earlier that the young ones learn. They have an amazing concentration span. I've had kindergarten teachers who've said, I wish my children had an attention span like this. But anyway, here you see an infant so interested in what the adults do, infant with mother. And here the infant just as interested in what his elder sister is doing. And in the middle there, if you can make it out, there's a little infant. You can just see the lips, curious about what the mother is doing, and the almost adult daughter is equally curious. So that's how these cultures are passed from one generation to the next. Objects are also used as weapons. And sticks may be used as clubs. Stones may be used as missiles. Some chimpanzees have really good aim. And for me, it was a real shock, and it was after 10 years of study, when I first realized just how violent chimpanzees can be in certain situations. They have a dark side to their nature just as we do. And it's when a group of patrolling males, patrolling their territory, spy an individual from a neighboring social group, and they will give chase, and if they catch that unfortunate victim, subject him or her to a brutal gang attack, from which that individual typically dies of wounds inflicted. And this was a shock. It doesn't happen that often, but when it does, it's dramatic and, as I say, somewhat horrifying. But more often, we see patterns of love, affection, altruism. And when they're communicating with posture and gesture, these postures and gestures are uncannily like our own. Kissing, embracing, holding hands, patting one another on the back, swaggering, shaking the fist, and they perform these postures and gestures in the same kind of situation that we do. One chimpanzee will reassure another by patting gently, or by embracing, or by holding hands. And we see all of these things. And so it's been, for me, particularly fascinating to see the similarities in social behavior, which perhaps reflect the incredible similarities in biology. The structure of DNA of chimpanzees and humans differs by only just over 1%. The structure of the blood is so similar that some people believe you could get a blood transfusion from a chimpanzee. The immune system is so similar that some scientists have decided that they can use chimpanzees as guinea pigs to experiment with drugs and vaccines for diseases which otherwise only humans get, but which chimpanzees, because of the similarities in the immune system, can catch or be infected with. So intellectually, because the brain is more like ours, it's almost identical except that ours is bigger. It means that they're capable of intellectual performances we used to think unique to humans. They can learn over 400 of the signs of American Sign Language and use those when they communicate with each other to some extent, as well as with their teacher. They can do amazing things with computers. The most intelligent chimpanzee I know lives in Japan. She's called Ai. She's worked with Professor Matsuzawa now for some 20 years. And she can work out numbers on her computer and order them from 1 to 9 or from 9 to 1, depending on what she's asked to do. In a memory game, she's beaten every single student who's gone to try and beat her. And her son Ayumu, who's never been taught, except he's watched his mother, he can do things which people say is impossible. And he does them with his mind. So they're highly intelligent. Why am I no longer at Gombe, in the place I love so much? Because I suddenly came to understand in the mid-80s that chimpanzees across Africa were endangered. You remember the scene I showed you at the beginning, the lush forest going along the shore? Now you see a cutoff line. On the other side of the boundary of this tiny 30 square mile national park are bare hills. They're almost like your deserts in Abu Dhabi. And I flew over this whole area in a small plane. And looking down, it was very clear there were far more people living outside the park than the land could possibly support. And they were too poor to buy food from anywhere else. And how could we even try to save these famous chimpanzees while people were struggling to survive? And that led to our program called Takari, or Take Care, which is a very holistic program to improve the lives of the people living around Gombe National Park. It's a program which has revealed itself to be amazingly successful. It began in '94. We're now replicating it in other parts of Africa. It's a program that could be introduced at any part of the world where you get people